Hello and welcome to Global Eye with me, Parikshit Luthra. It's been 7 months since the Ukraine-Russia war began. So where do things really stand? Ukraine has recaptured territory which was under Russian control in both southern and eastern Ukraine. President Putin refuses to relent. He's stepping up the military offensive. In the meanwhile, President Biden has warned about the risk of a nuclear Armageddon for the first time since the Cold War. So where is Europe headed with this war? What does this mean for the energy security of countries which are dependent on Russian energy? We're joined by Germany's envoy to India, Philipp Ackermann. Ambassador Ackermann, thank you very much for joining us here on Global Eye. Give us a sense of what does Germany feel about the trajectory of this war? Ukraine has recaptured some important territory in eastern and southern Ukraine, which is under Russian occupation. Russia has announced its intention to annex Ukrainian territory, step up military operations. Where is all of this going?
So, Parikshit, thank you for having me. And I want to start by saying that we observe the situation on the ground very carefully. And as you rightly say, there's a development on the front. It is interesting to see how quickly the Ukrainian troops have being able to conquer parts of the territory back, and that was quite a remarkable achievement, I would say. At the same time, we see continued attacks on Zaporizhzhia, on the nuclear power plant and the surroundings, and therefore, I think one should not be too quick in drawing conclusions. It is a very difficult situation, and this conflict is not going to stop soon. It will be with us for a long time, I'm afraid.
What is your view about the risk of a nuclear escalation? We've seen rocket attacks in Zaporizhzhia. Do you feel that a nuclear escalation is possible?
I think there is a real threat. I don't want to say that it is going to come. I think it's not sure, and we have experienced Putin as a gambler in the past couple of months. He is, you don't know what he has really in mind, but with the situation deteriorating for the Russian side at the front, I will not exclude that he recurs to old threats, and he has voiced and worded these threats a couple of times. So, frankly, we are very worried right now.
As Putin gets more desperate, do you see this war entering a more riskier situation?
Yes, I think the risks are real. You have seen that the American side has reached out to the Russians and have made clear, the American side has made clear what that would entail as a consequence from the Western side. So I hope that the Kremlin understood this message loud and clear, that if they escalate, it comes at a tremendous cost also for them. So I still hope and pray that this is not going to happen. But I have to say, after our experience of the last couple of months, we expect, the worst, basically. So let's keep our fingers crossed that it's not going to happen.
According to you, how could this war change Europe's security architecture?
This is a very interesting question, and I think that is the main question that every European country is asking itself now. Now, I think what you have seen in Germany is a sea change, as it were, when it comes to a reassessment of foreign policy. We have started rearming our own army by with a large amount of money. We feel that territorial defense is becoming much more important. We will try to enable our army, but also other European armies, in order to defend European territories against aggression. And therefore, I think you'll see a more robust approach in Europe militarily when it comes to defending its borders than we had before. Frankly, we were under the illusion that war in Europe was not an option anymore. And basically, we were very surprised that this illusion was false, was a wrong illusion. So therefore, we have to rearrange our thinking. We have to beef up our armies, and that's done together with our European allies and friends.
Also, give us a sense of how Germany is looking to step up military support to Ukraine.
So, as my government has said, we will support Ukraine as long as it is necessary. Germany is one of the top 3 contributors to Ukraine. We have civilian and humanitarian aid delivered, but also we have a lot of weaponry and ammunition delivered, including vehicles, small tanks, howitzers, and machine guns, and so forth. So Our commitment to Ukraine is very, very steady and will continue as long as it is necessary. It will go hand in hand with the support of our allies, America, but also European allies, and we will share. But Ukraine can count on Germany in this context.
And asking you about a medium and long-term view of how Germany is looking to secure its economic needs and energy needs as a result of this war.
So, as they say in diplomacy, never waste a crisis. You know, you must see sources of energy that are now for us much more interesting, and I think mainly that would be renewables. We will heavily invest in renewable energy and storage of renewable energy. We will very, very substantially invest in hydrogen, in green hydrogen. So you'll see that there is a change, a transition in energy provision in Germany that will be accelerated by this war in Ukraine. And everybody in Germany is looking towards sources of energy that are non-fossil and have to be developed very quickly on the ground with wind, solar, water, and hydrogen. So this will be, I think, a growing part of our energy mix in the very, very near future. And maybe this is basically one good thing out of this whole catastrophe, that we are accelerating our transition to non-fossil and renewable energy.
All right, we've run out of time, but Ambassador Philipp Ackermann, thank you very much for joining us here on Global Eye to give us Germany's view on where this war is headed and about the risk of a nuclear escalation as well. On that note, we take a short break here on Global Eye. When we return, we get you an exclusive conversation with Hans Timmer, the World Bank chief economist for South Asia, on the latest World Bank outlook for India and South Asia. Don't go anywhere. That exclusive conversation coming up. Welcome back. You are watching Global Eye. Time now for a CNBC-TV18 exclusive. Lingering scars of COVID-19, a global slowdown, war in Ukraine, an economic crisis in Sri Lanka and floods in Pakistan are among the unprecedented combination of shocks for the South Asian economy. That's the word coming in from the World Bank in their latest outlook for South Asia. The World Bank has projected a 5.8% growth for South Asia in 22, a 1% downward revision over June, and also slashed India's GDP forecast to 6.5% due to global uncertainties. Speaking exclusively to CNBC-TV18, Hans Timmer, World Bank's chief economist for South Asia, said that India is in a better place than other economies, but there are inflation challenges as well. I began by asking him about the World Bank's growth projections for South Asia.
The key challenges are that South Asia has been hit in short order by what we would call a series of once-in-a-lifetime shocks. So we had the floods, devastating floods in Pakistan. We have the impact of the war in Ukraine, rising, pushing up the commodity prices, food prices. We have a full-blown balance of payments and macroeconomic crisis in Sri Lanka, and that comes on top of the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, the COVID-19. And now more recently, there are headwinds because of a slowing of activity and import demand in high-income countries and a tightening of monetary policy in high-income countries that leads to a tightening of global financial markets. So many challenges. As you said, we downgraded our forecast for this year. GDP growth for the region now 5.8%, a 1% downgrade from only a few months ago, from June. And it is a slowdown for the region as a whole, because the previous year growth was 7.8% when the region rebounded from the crisis.
Right.
Two caveats with that forecast. One, the countries show a very diverse development, still a shrinking economy in Sri Lanka, although it's difficult to put numbers on it, declining incomes in Afghanistan, while in other countries GDP growth is still firmly positive. Second caveat is that GDP growth doesn't tell the whole story of income development for countries, because there are income losses on top of GDP because of the rising input prices. And that means that households in the region, they don't experience the kind of income that would be suggested by GDP growth forecast.
All right.
Difficult situation in South Asia.
All right. A difficult situation in South Asia. How do you think India is likely to fare among other South Asian economies?
India is still doing relatively well, although it was also downgraded 1 percentage point since June, with now the forecast of 6.5% GDP growth. Again, a slowdown as we see in the rest of the region. India has the same problem with the rising commodity prices, rising input prices, and also the tightening of the global financial markets and weaker demand abroad. As a result of that, we expect that the second half of this calendar year will be relatively weak also for India.
All right, you're saying that H2 will be weak for India as well. Now, when it comes to India's export story, how do you think this is going to play out for the rest of the year?
It's a mixed bag. Like other countries, the weak demand in the rest of the world doesn't help India, and that puts downward pressure on exports. At the same time, over the last 2 years, since the start of COVID-19, we see very strong exports in what we call the new services. The digital services in general got a boost in all countries during the COVID pandemic, but especially India benefited a lot from that. And we have seen that coming through in the exports of services now also. So a difficult story on the good side, but very positive signs on the exports of new services.
All right. Positive on the services. But to speak to you about inflation, the large picture when it comes to inflation is that the World Bank currently is projecting a 9.2% inflation for South Asia, which will start declining gradually. By when do you think this decline will happen? And where does India stand when it comes to this inflation projection?
Yeah, the inflation projection for India, I think, is above 7%. That's above the range that the central bank would want. So it's still on the high end side. There are several drivers of that inflation. First of all, of course, the commodity prices that went up. Secondly, strong domestic demand in the rebound from COVID, driven also by a large fiscal deficit, a rebound in private consumption, and still some disruptions on the supply side. And so all these factors, they have led to inflation. When will inflation come down? So when the commodity prices in international markets come down, that helps, of course. When the demand becomes more moderate, and that means also consolidation on the fiscal side in India, that is important. A further normalization of monetary policy would contribute to the slowdown in inflation. And then also all the measures that can boost productivity, increase supply, and counteract the supply disruptions that came from the COVID pandemic.
All right, so there will be conditions which will be needed to fulfill when it comes to driving down the inflation. Of course, we will have to battle inflation in a big way, but going ahead, what are some of the challenges that you foresee for the Indian economy?
I think the current situation that we just discussed is one of the main challenges, and how to deal with inflation, how to make sure that you have the proper reaction to inflation, avoiding wage price spirals, making sure that the price signals are still working in the economy. And so that means no price subsidies, but direct income subsidies. And India has made great progress in expanding its social protection system since COVID-19, making sure that you don't rely too much on export bans, as we have seen recently, because that can backfire. So that's a big challenge for India. Making sure that going forward you accumulate buffers to absorb new shocks, and the shocks will continue to come. There are significant foreign exchange buffers in India, and that's why India is doing relatively well at the moment. But it is important to build up also fiscal buffers. That is important. And as part of a longer run strategy, it is really important to broaden the economic base in India. Still only 20% of the women participate in the labor market, 80–90% of the people in the informal sector with low productivity. So most of the growth is coming actually from a small part of society, large formal firms, and to broaden that activity is incredibly important for long-term growth. Give also the people the tools themselves to cope with shocks, and ultimately also to increase the revenues for the government, which is important for sound medium-term fiscal frameworks.
Mr. Timmers, you also said that export bans are likely to backfire. India has put restrictions on the export of sugar, wheat and rice. What kind of reaction do you foresee in the coming months?
Yeah, it's difficult to project what will happen in the coming months. It's just a general observation from past experience where countries impose export bans, which are very logical, because food security of your population is really important. So it's a logical reaction. But what it does is that it further increases the prices in international markets. And that means that the gap between the price domestically and international markets will widen. It's bad for other countries, but ultimately it could backfire also domestically, because the producers of these commodities see the high prices in international markets, and it's likely that they start hoarding or wait till they can export in other markets. So in the short run, it's a logical reaction. In the medium run, our experience is that it might backfire.
All right. Thank you very much, Hans Timmer, for joining us with your outlook for the South Asian economy. That's all we have time for on Global Eye. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.